I'm Father Stephen Riley. In this short series, I'm focusing on some works of art which will help us to make our way spiritually through the season of Eastertide. And today I'd like to focus upon a very beautiful piece of art. It's by Fra Angelico, or Beato Angelico, and it's called Noli Tangere. Fra Angelico is also known as Giovanni da Fiesole. He was born John and he took his vows at the monastery in Fiesole as a Dominican. And he, along with many of his companions, moved to Florence in the 1430s to take up residence in a new monastery which had been built in the city of Florence called San Marco. And in that monastery, Giovanni, or Beato Angelico, began to paint. He painted most famously, perhaps, at the top of the stairs on the level of all of the cells, a beautiful Annunciation, which is one of the most beautiful which has ever been painted and which has been reproduced so many times. I'm sure you'll recognise it. But also in each of the cells, he also painted a painting. And it's quite remarkable to think of that, really, that the monks had their own personal masterpiece. And how he painted it was with great skill, but also with great simplicity as well. He is known as one who gives a graciousness to his characters. And the art historians tell us that is partly for a reason, that where you see works of art of the period in Florence and Rome and elsewhere, then often they are much richer in terms of colours. There's lots of gold, there's lots of lapis lazuli, and different darker kind of tones, and they are there because they were very difficult to find and they cost a lot of money. And so when there was a great patron who asked for an artist to paint something and gave them lots of money, then the patron expected that these rich sources would be used. Whereas here in the convent they didn't have the access to quite so many riches, and so there's a great lightness about these paintings. They don't have the darkness and the kind of heaviness of the gold and the darker blue, but rather their colours are much more graceful, if you like. Beato Angelico was caught up in a great time in Florence. He was able to go and to see the work of his contemporaries, for example Filippo Lippi or Masaccio, and what was really taking place at that point was what's known as early Renaissance. The painting is changing, there's a greater sense of perspective, but also particularly the emotions which are expressed are much more humanly and realistically expressed in the painting. And often fabrics as well are much better portrayed with the different pleats, for example, and there's a much better sense of three-dimensionality. And that's what Beato Angelico brings to these mosaics which are in the cells of San Marco. You'll see the shape of these pictures, which is quite remarkable because of the way and where they were painted. They essentially followed the lines of the cell and they kind of copied the shape of the window or the door which would be beside that space, and so they've got kind of an arched top to them. And that's going to become quite important as we look at this beautiful painting. It's in one of the cells and it's called Noli Tangere. It tells the story, of course, of Jesus risen from the dead and Mary Magdalene, who encounters Jesus in the garden and thinks he is the gardener. That's why Jesus has a hoe or a digging implement in his hand. And Noli Tangere in Latin means do not touch me. But in actual fact, that's a mistranslation of the original Greek. It's the translation in the Vulgate Bible, the Latin Bible, which was used in the church for many centuries. And they just got it slightly wrong. Noli Tangere means don't touch me. But now modern translations pick up the Greek and would say don't cling on to me. So it's not don't touch me, it's don't keep touching me. And so Jesus isn't saying to Mary Magdalene, I've gone over to another side, a spiritual side, so you can't even touch me. He is still affectionate, he's still himself, but don't cling on to me because I'm moving on to the Father. I'm moving to a different plane, returning to the Father's right hand. And when we look at the painting, we see that that's reflected in the way that Fra Angelico has painted it. And what he's done is something very clever. He's used the arch of the cell to divide the painting into two. And it's quite clear that he's divided it into two because he has divided it in the middle by putting a palm tree that you can see right down the middle of the painting. So clearly there are two different planes, and artists have used that down the centuries. Many centuries later, for example, we'll find in Edgar Degas, who painting horse racing or painting dancers, manages to separate the painting into two very different planes. He does it in a kind of diagonal way. One plane which is often quite empty and another which is crowded with people, and that's got a symbolism as well as drawing the eye in certain directions. So many centuries before that, Fra Angelico has done that and divided the painting into two. On the left-hand side we have Mary Magdalene and we have the tomb that Jesus has risen from. And there's a great sense of solidity about the left hand of the painting. And it's obvious that this represents the earthly realm, the earthly sphere. We see the solidity of the rock into which the tomb was carved. And we also see the solidity of Mary Magdalene herself. She's crouching down. Her robes are flowing out from her. She's got, if you like, a kind of low sense of gravity. And so there's something very solid and very earthly and earthy about what's on the left-hand plane. And what's on the right-hand plane is the spiritual world, the spiritual plane. And so Jesus, he is kind of ethereal. He's not crouching down, he's moving upwards. When you look at his feet, they're barely touching the ground. It's almost as if he's starting to move up to heaven. And there's a great lightness about his clothes. He is starting to ascend to the Father. But what's really beautiful, I think, is that if we look right down the middle of the painting, we'll see that there is one thing which has moved over from the earthly sphere to the heavenly sphere. And it is the hand of Mary Magdalene, which is stretched out to touch Jesus. And they're almost touching in their hands. And it's so beautiful. Mary Magdalene loved Jesus. She accompanied him on his missionary journeys around Galilee. She was there at the foot of the cross, and now she is the first to witness his resurrection. She loves the Lord so much that she dares to cross over, to stretch over between the earthly and the heavenly, because she doesn't want Jesus to go. And that's something really beautiful as we too stretch out spiritually, if you like, towards the Lord, yearn for him, yearn for his return, and yearn for the life of heaven. And think about it, this was in someone's cell, and I'm sure many monks died in that cell. And perhaps in their last days they would have had this personal epiphany, if you like, to be able to look up at that painting and for them too to yearn for the life of heaven. You know, sometimes when people are dying, they kind of stretch their hands out, and we don't know why, we don't know what they're seeing, but they seem to be seeing something that we don't see, and they're stretching out their hand, yearning maybe for the life to come, to meet their loved ones in heaven, or to meet the Lord himself. And so for a monk to experience this and to stretch out his hand as Mary Magdalene did would be to prepare for his death and prepare for the life of heaven. What a beautiful image to take with us throughout this Easter season, to recognise that while we're here on earth we can pray to, we can be in contact with, we can yearn for the Lord, and that one day we will cross over from that earthly into that heavenly plane and live forever in happiness with the risen Lord.